Now it's my pleasure to welcome to the stage Andrew Cooke. Andrew's the General Manager of Rezare Systems, and Rezare Systems are the people who provide the technology behind our SIL database and the way it uses the data very effectively. And there's some big challenges ahead because DNA is on the horizon here. Thank you, Andrew.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. Despite that, we're pretty close to time, so I'd just like to try a little experiment. Can I get you to stand up for a moment? Just quietly, because I'm going to carry on talking. So if I can get you to stand up for a moment, and particularly the ram breeders in the room, I just want you to visualise for a moment that a group of commercial farmers have turned up at your property. They love what they see, they love the indices, they love the rams, and they've offered to buy all the rams you can produce over the next 3 years at a significant premium over what you've been receiving. Now we're going to do a little exercise, and I'm going to give you an option. Now you can either put your hands in the air like this and go woohoo, or you can put your hands in the air and I want you to clap 6 times, all right? So we're going to do that. Ready, set, go. Excellent, excellent. Take a seat, take a seat. So look, you've been sitting there for nearly 2 hours, so it was the opportunity to give you a bit of a break. It's also the closest I'm ever going to get to a standing ovation, particularly because I'm here to talk to you about the SIL database, and databases by themselves are never that exciting. Many of you will be wondering, who is this guy? Rezare Systems is not a household name. We're a software company. We've been working in this space for 11 years, since many of us left AgResearch and set up our own company nearly 11 years ago. My colleague John Davis, who's just down the front there, has been working with SIL data and on the SIL database for, about 14 years, John? Something like that. I started working with animal breeding in the genetics section at Rokura in 1989. We work across the ag sector, but only in agriculture, and we develop various notorious pieces of software, including tools like FarmMax, which will likely be some of the tools that have been used for some of the economic evaluations. We work with AgResearch, land care and plant and food research on things like Overseer, the tool that's used for nutrient budgeting. But then we do a lot of work that sits under the hood in a lot of the other tools that many of your farm supplies companies, your purchasing companies, people who buy your products also use. So that's who Rezare is. And obviously our work is on the SIL database. So the SIL database is, I would say, it's a moderate-sized database. It's probably reasonably large in some New Zealand terms. There are 13 million animals on the database. Of course, they're not all alive. You maintain your records well. But they're all there to provide us with that back pedigree that's needed to connect animals and flocks. There are 5.3 billion breeding value records. And as reports are run and in-flock and ACE breeding values are calculated, those records get unloaded and loaded frequently. So quite a busy database at times. It's nearly a terabyte in size. That's a reasonable sized database, and that's just the size of the data when it's sort of at rest on the disks in the computer. When it's working, of course, we need many times that amount of space, so a decent sized database. And the SIL database has been fit for the purposes that we've put it to over the last 14 years. And I have to say that carefully, because I would describe the SIL database as a traditional animal performance breeding database. It's part of a traditional performance recording system. So the way that SIL works, the way that you put data into it, we process the data and we send you results, is not grossly different from the way that the National Flock Recording Scheme worked back in the 1970s. Yeah. It's not substantially different from the way the predecessors of SIL worked when I worked on them in the 1980s. So, and 90s. So effectively, you capture data, You capture it in the field. Some of it goes in a yellow notebook. Some of it goes in other forms of data collection device. You transfer that to paper forms in many cases and send them to your bureau operator, and they do a stunning job of punching that data, sorting it out, figuring out what you meant by some of those things and getting it in. They run reports and send you the results. Our database stores pedigree data, and it stores performance data, those phenotypic observations that you've recorded, the traits that you've recorded, but we don't store genotypes. We don't store any of that DNA data. And as you've already heard from Dan this morning, there's multiple ways to produce breeding values, and separate genetic engines are used, and I'm sure you'll hear this soon from Mark. Separate genetic engines are used to produce breeding values depending on whether we're looking at phenotypic data or genotype data. So look, there's a little picture of the current system. Collecting data manually, good. Transcribing it to paper forms, not always so good, because every step we go of transcription and data entry, we have potential to lose a little bit of accuracy, lose some, type a few things wrong, or maybe we transcribe things wrong. That's quite often the case. And so we've got some data validation steps, and by and large our bureau operators are very experienced, and they're actually quite good at, by eye, validating the data as they go. We put the data into the database, we email out very large PDF files, your bureaus print those for you or send you the PDF files, or for some of you they send you CSV files, and you download the CSV files into Excel and do amazing manipulations with them, and I'm always very impressed to see things that breeders have come up with. So what are we talking about when we talk about updating the SIL database, which is a work that we have started on and will be in progress over the next few years? Well, firstly, we're not talking about picking up the whole SIL database and throwing it out and starting again. That would be rather disastrous. What we are talking about is moving it to a next generation platform. And perhaps I better tell you what I mean by next generation. So from a technology perspective, and particularly a consumer technology perspective, what's been happening over the last 10 years or so, certainly the last 7 or 8 years, around the sorts of technologies that you deal with every day. The sorts of technologies that are in your cars, that are in your homes, for many of you that are in your pockets. Well, we're certainly seeing that technology is playing a much greater role. It's much more immediate. So we're expecting to use these sorts of things and use them for all sorts of tasks then and there. And I'm talking to people. I went to a meeting a few weeks back, and a lot of the people there didn't know me, and they said, "Oh, while you were talking, I was looking you up and seeing what Rezare was doing, and I was seeing what sort of things you write about and those sorts of things." Immediate, looking at data when they needed to know it. We also collect data a lot more in the flow of things in real time. So your car's engine computer is collecting information about how it's performing, and it's using it to adjust fuel and adjust all those sorts of things on the fly, things that we didn't do 15 years ago. The shops are collecting data, as we know, from our credit card transactions and those Flybuys cards and all those great things, and they're using them to adjust their displays and adjust their advertising campaigns on the fly. So when I'm talking about a next generation platform for the SIL database, I'm talking about a set of technology and a set of connection points in the database that will allow sheep breeders and those who serve them and those who eventually use that data in the commercial farming sector to use those same sorts of technologies. Some of them we can visualise, and in a few moments I'll talk about mobile applications and other bits and pieces, but frankly, we don't know the full extent of the things that you will do with that data over the next 15 years. All we do need to know is that we need to make sure we've got a great set of technologies and systems that will form the basis and allow you to do that and allow people to build those systems. So we're moving the SIL database to a new collection of technologies that we think will set us in good stead for the next few years. Along the way, we want to make sure that we streamline in-field data collection and make it easier to use mobile devices. So those exact same pictures that Dan put up, and I won't put up the pictures, of Gallagher and TrueTest equipment being used in the field, and many of you are using those same sorts of pieces of equipment. A number of farmers are using EID to capture and make sure that they get identification of animals more correct, and that's great. And SIL has sort of supported capturing some of that data, but we haven't really made it easy for you to deal with that data. We haven't made it easy for you to get it in. We haven't streamlined it. We will be doing some of that. And again, SIL will be developing, or Beef and Lamb Genetics will be developing some of those tools. We'll also be making it easier for other organisations to develop those tools. If we streamline data collection, and if data comes directly from your device out in the field, be it some smart weigh scales or your smartphone, and hits the SIL database, we're going to need some additional data validation. We're going to need to support the role of the bureau operator becoming the role of the expert advisor, the person who assists you with your data, because they may be doing less data entry over time. We're going to need to have systems that flag to you either in the field when you're collecting data, or certainly before you say, yes, that data can go into SIL, hey, there's something a bit screwy here. Did you really mean to do that? This doesn't look like live weight 8 data. Yeah? Of course, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the genotypes and the data that's coming from the DNA labs ends up in the SIL database. Two reasons for that. Firstly, the people who've been doing an excellent job at analysing this data for you have not necessarily had a big structured framework of where they're going to store that data. We want to make sure it's safe and allocated and stored beside the rest of your performance and pedigree data. So that's important. We think that's important for the long-term benefits to all breeders. Secondly, the new genetic engines that we're going to be hearing about shortly will be single step. That is, they can combine DNA data and the pedigree and performance data you've been recording at the same time. So we need to streamline that process. Gosh, especially if we want to do it more regularly and more routinely and not do a SIL-ACE analysis every 2 months, then we need to actually streamline that process. And we can do that by bringing all of that data together. And of course, we'll need to support the definition of new traits and new goal traits over time. So look, here's my little diagram of the updated system. And I put this up, and for some of you, you'll be going, yes, about time. They finally come into the modern age, and they're going to support the electronic technology and systems I've been hanging out for. And some of you have already talked to me about that. And others of you will be going, oh no, where's the paper gone? And first, let me reassure you, the paper hasn't disappeared. I left it off the diagram because it becomes optional. It becomes something that you can choose to do and to have. Yeah? So you can choose to collect the data in the field using the sort of equipment that I know Craig Foote's going to show us tomorrow, some smart equipment for capturing data in the field. And you'll be able to capture that data and bring it almost straight into SIL with just those review steps along the way. That'll be good. You'll be able to get the data back out of SIL so that when you're looking at an animal in the crush in front of you, you can look at it and say, ah, excellent, I can see the DPO index for that animal. I can see the breeding values for that animal. And again, many of you have been doing this. You've shown me how you have manipulated files in Excel and you've then downloaded them to your TrueTest device so you can see that same sort of data. But with the new system, we'll be able to streamline that process. It will be much easier. So what else does that tell us? Well, it tells us that by bringing all of that data together, we're going to be able to support the new evaluations that we're going to do in the future. The other piece I put up in there is a thing called an integration API. That's tech speak, sorry. But an integration API means the connection points for systems to plug together. Rezare Systems and Beef and Lamb Genetics are involved with work that's also being carried out by the Red Meat Profit Partnership, and in fact by the dairy industry as well, around making it easier for data to flow between systems. That might mean your carcass data from your meat processor. It might mean the data that's in FarmMax, or the data that's in SIL, or the data that's in a number of other systems, being able to be shared with your permission with other people who you want to share that data with. Maybe it's your consultant or your advisor. Maybe it's with somebody who's able to provide some additional services and reports for you. Maybe it's just saying, hey, this data here that's mine, I want it to be shared with this mobile application over here that somebody else developed but that I use, and I want to use this application on farm. So maybe you're using FarmIQ systems, and you're saying, well, actually, I want the data from FarmIQ to flow into SIL, and I want the SIL data to flow into FarmIQ for my farm. Well, those are the sorts of things that we can achieve by allowing these systems to talk together. Again, before I scare anybody, it's not sharing like the sort of data matching that we all worry about government departments doing. Yeah? It's sharing that has you, as the person who's captured that data, making the decision about who you share it with and what systems you allow to access that data. But to me, that's really exciting because, again, I'll reiterate, we don't know what you and what people who are providing services to you are going to be doing with this data in 10 years' time. But we do know that we'll need the flexibility to allow it to happen, and we'll need to be able to connect systems together to allow that to happen. So what are some of the other outcomes that we expect to see during this upgrading of the SIL database, in other words, over the next year or 2 or 3? I've talked about capturing data in the field. I'm not going to spend a lot more time on that, except to say that SIL's work on in-field data capture is kicking off now and will happen over the next 6 to 10 months. And so you will see tools coming out from Beef and Lamb Genetics that will allow you to streamline your data capture in the field, bring it in and have an approval step that says, great, I want to use that data. Integration with third parties, again, I've talked about new web-based tools. And look, we've seen some of them. We've seen some tools, and you'll look at some of the posters around there and you'll see some analyses of data that people have done that are just screaming out to be turned into interactive tools. Yeah, I can see Jude smiling. Some of the work that she's done, just crying out for that. Perfect, that's the sort of stuff we'd love to see happening. Tools like some of the tools that Zoetis has been using in the United States that allow breeders to drill into their data and learn interesting things. Again, if those tools could be plugged into and pointed at SIL, that's going to give you a whole range of new options. So I would expect we'll see some of those things coming to fruition over the next couple of years. There are also, because of Beef and Lamb New Zealand's mandate, and hence Beef and Lamb Genetics mandate, there will be tools for commercial farmers and their advisors, stock agents. And obviously, again, in your pack, you've got that little smartphone-shaped thing, which is the Flock Finder application. And Flock Finder is effectively the first of those. It's a prototype in many ways. It works, of course, but it's a prototype to allow us to explore how commercial farmers could use data from SIL. Could they, for instance, use some of the new benchmarking tools that members of the Red Meat Profit Partnership are building to allow them to benchmark their farm and identify some of their strengths and weaknesses? Could they find out that, hey, animal genetics is an opportunity for me to improve? And actually, by selecting animals with these sorts of indices, I could make this sort of difference on my farm system. Well, that'd be great. And again, if it contributes to adoption of better genetics by the industry, that's what we're after. So we don't know what all of these tools are going to look like in the future. And we're very open to hear feedback from you as to what tools you think would be useful for you and useful for your customers, because that will help us to inform the next set of work over the next few years. I'm aware I'm just about done on my time, and so one other thing that I wanted to say specifically is over the next few months, as we're starting to put together these data collection tools that we want to use in field, and we're starting to consider how you might use them, we need your assistance. It'd be fine for us as a group of boffins, computer programmers and geneticists to sit in Dunedin or Hamilton and say, oh, we think they're going to do this, and come up with some pieces of software that do this. But in actual fact, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to get out and watch you as you're handling your animals and talk to you about the sorts of things that you want to do with these tools. And so my invitation to you is I'm going to be here today and tomorrow. I'm going to be hanging around during the poster sessions. Come and talk to me. Come and take a business card or give me your details, and I'd like to add you to a group of people who would be interested in participating in that sort of work. Okay? That'd be much appreciated. Excellent. Well, thank you, and I'm going to take a few questions. One down here in the front.
Thanks, Andrew. Andrew Bendel. More of an observation, but one with a point. As a user of SIL, Farmax and Overseer, the observation is the dangers of all three of them if they're used with limited, or even worse, someone else's information or averaged information. Obviously compared with the power of all three of them if they're used with correct and validated information which is relevant to your environment or farm. And I dare say the point is that I believe there needs to be more emphasis from the powers to be that the information going in is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I completely agree, Andrew. I think in many cases all three of those applications have evolved over time, and they've evolved from their original use, and people certainly say that frequently about Overseer, but it would be fair to say for all of those tools. And that's great, because that evolution of use is what should happen. But along with that, we need to evolve our procedures for using it, the way our training for people around using those tools, and in fact the user interfaces of those tools as well to encourage the right behaviours. Yeah. I think there was one over there. Yep.
With your planned tools, does that include an app for a tablet or a phone for entering lambing data that quite a few of us have been asking for a while?
It does. It does. Yes, that's exactly right. And so again, I've had a number of people talk to me about different ways that they collect lambing data. And so if we're to create a tool that usefully helps your business, we're going to need your feedback around how that should work.